Today in geography, we're in the global connections section at the end of chapter 14. We're looking at the constant barrage of either earthquakes or tsunamis and these huge natural disasters that affect the people that live in this eastern portion of Asia. Then we're going to take that information and we're going to apply it in our technology skills activity today and learn how to cite sources and do a little research about these tsunamis and earthquakes. First, we're going to read through this global connections portion. You can find it in your textbook or in your online textbook. Your online textbook obviously looks just like this. The theory of a tsunami. A tsunami is a series of ocean waves generated by earthquakes, landslides, volcanic activity, or other disturbances below or on the seafloor. Scientists say that earthquakes cause about 90% of all tsunamis. Some of the warning signs. A tsunami can strike quickly. There are a few warning signals that typically occur. If an earthquake strikes, do not stay in a low area or near water. So if there's shaking happening in these parts of the world, people know I got to get away from the water. Earthquakes often trigger a tsunami because that movement of those tectonic plates under the ocean then creates a movement of that water. Sometimes the ocean appears to drain away before approaching tsunami hits. This draining away, it means that the wave is just building up further out away from shore, and as soon as that water starts to drain away, people know time to get out of here. Did you know the Richter scale is used to rate the magnitude or the amount of energy released of an earthquake? Most earthquakes that occur today are less than 3 on the Richter scale and do not produce much damage. On average, at least one earthquake with a magnitude of 8.0 occurs each year, 8.0 being the high end of that Richter scale. 4 out of 5. About 4 in every 5 tsunamis occur in the Ring of Fire in the Pacific Ocean. Tectonic shifts make volcanoes and earthquakes common there. Some tsunamis are 100 miles long or longer. They can travel as fast as 500 miles per hour and as fast as a commercial jet plane. At that speed, they can cross the Pacific Ocean in less than a day. Read about the 2 significant tsunamis in recent times. If we look at the next page here, we're going to get some statistics on some of the major tsunamis and earthquake activities that has happened in East Asia. The largest recorded tsunami in modern times luckily struck the isolated region around Lituya Bay, Alaska. Waves rose 1,700 feet. That's taller than the Empire State Building. Imagine how big that wave would be come crashing towards that area. Good thing it was in Alaska, and it was in an isolated area where there wasn't going to be a lot of damage. December 26, 2004, the deadliest tsunami in recorded history in the Indian Ocean. Tsunami killed an estimated 230,000 people. Tsunami swept through a wide area, including Indonesia, India, Madagascar, and Ethiopia. Many people died in the weeks after the tsunami hit because of lack of water and medical treatment. You can see here in this picture, the top-down view, what happens when a tsunami hits. You've got this land area that's next to the water. As that water recedes back, a huge wave is created and it comes crashing into land and almost kind of forms this type of flood activity. You can see the aftermath here of all that destruction and just absolute power of that moving water that comes into an area and almost kind of wipes out that entire thing. These are some statistics about some major earthquakes and a tsunami that struck Japan in March 2001. Japan was hit by an 8.9 magnitude earthquake on March 11, 2011 that triggered a deadly 23-foot tsunami in the northern part of the country. In comparison, the 1998 earthquake that caused massive damage in California was only a 6.9 on the Richter scale. The tsunamis in Japan recalled the 2004 disaster in the Indian Ocean. On December 26, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake, the largest earthquake in 40 years, ruptured in the Indian Ocean off the northwest coast of Indonesia, island of Sumatra. The earthquake stirred up the deadliest tsunami in world history. It was so powerful that the waves caused loss of life on the coast of Africa and were even detected on the east coast of the United States. At a news conference on March 13th, Prime Minister Naoto Kan, who later gave the disaster the name Great East Japanese Earthquake, emphasized the gravity of the situation. I think the earthquake's tsunami and the situation at a nuclear reactor makes up the worst crisis in the 65 years since the war. If the nation works together, we will overcome. The government called in 100,000 troops to aid in the relief effort. So this tsunami that hit Japan actually took out a nuclear reactor, a nuclear power plant, and then that reactor failed in keeping kind of the nuclear reaction taking place. So there's tons of radiation in that area. It's now a desolate and deserted place. 200,000. Cooling systems in one of the reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station in Fukushima Prefecture on the east coast of Japan failed shortly after the earthquake. causing a nuclear crisis. The initial reactor failure was followed by an explosion and eventual partial meltdown in 2 reactors, then by a fire in another reactor that released radioactivity directly into the atmosphere. The nuclear troubles were not limited to the Daech plant. 3 other nuclear facilities also reported problems. More than 200,000 residents were evacuated from affected areas. We're studying this in science, and the nuclear reactors need water. That water is used is heated up to form steam to turn that into electricity, so that's why they're usually near the coast. That also happens to be where the tsunamis are going to hit, so there's kind of a bad scenario happening when those two things mix. 15,839. According to the official toll, the disaster left 15,839 people dead, 3,647 missing. 1 year after the tsunami, about 160,000 people had not returned to their homes. They had just left, abandoned the area because the residual effect is that radioactivity and that radiation being dangerous for people in the future. On April 12, 2011, Japan increased its assessment of the situation at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant to level 7, the worst rating on the international scale, putting the disaster on par with the 1986 Chernobyl explosion in Russia. The wave traveled in all directions from the epicenter of the disturbance. The waves may travel in an open sea as fast as 450 miles per hour, or also gives a statistic of 500 miles per hour. As they travel in the open ocean, tsunami waves are generally not particularly large, hence the difficulty in detecting them as they approach. But as these powerful waves approach shallow waters along the coast, their velocity is slowed, and they constantly grow to a greater height before the smashing into the shore. This global impact of these destructive forces. Hundreds of small earthquakes shake Japan every year. Major quakes occur less often, but they cause disastrous damages and loss of life. When an undersea earthquake generates a tsunami, a huge tidal wave gets higher and higher as it approaches the coast. Many lives may be lost. Because earthquakes and tsunamis are difficult to predict, some parts of the region, especially in high population areas, rely on special building methods and emergency preparedness to help reduce casualties. You can kind of see where the statistics show those major tsunamis and earthquakes happening because of that Pacific Rim, that Pacific Ring of Fire. That brings us to our technology skill activity today, which is all about citing sources. Maybe you've seen something like this. Somebody say, "What do you mean I got it wrong? I got the answers on the internet." Well, that's important to know that you're doing quality research, but you also have to tell us where that information comes from. So you're looking at a worksheet that looks like this. My Google Slides presentation goes right along with what we're actually focusing on here. Citing sources. When preparing a report that includes information from secondary sources, a writer must cite or give credit to an original source. This guideline applies regardless of the form or the source. Web sources vary in the format, and this can make putting together a consistent source list challenging and confusing. The chart below gives a few guidelines for citing common types of internet sources. If an internet website is used for citing sources, you have to put it into this format. If there's a page on a website, you put it into this format. If there's an article on a magazine, you put it into this format. An email into this format, an other type of source into this format. Here's a couple examples of how those are written out from actual web pages or emails or articles on sites. Here's just a way in which that format goes for those different types of material. Because they're a different type of material, they have to be cited in a specific way. Now, this can often be looked over as a skill that is not necessarily important, but once you get to a higher level in education and you're now creating your own type of paper, your own type of research, your own type of production, you have to be able to tell people where you got your information from so it's completely credible. So you learn to put these formats together and cite sources in a more effective way. Today we're kind of being introduced to that and seeing how that works. We're going to practice the skill when it comes to these specific examples. I'll show you what these look like, and then you're going to do some research into that 2011 earthquake that we just kind of looked at a little bit. I've got some sites that you can use, otherwise just your basic internet skill to look up that information to provide the fact, and where you found that information would be how you would go about completing this. To practice the skill, here's the first portion that you'd be filling in, the web page. Here's the information, and here's what that source looks like. Notice how they put the web page for the author first, then the actual web page title, the web sponsor, the date, and the date that it was actually accessed. So here's where it was published, and here's when you accessed it. That's important to know so that you're getting relevant information that is from recent times. For number 2, the subject line is questions about coal imports. The sender will send this would be in the form of an email. They use the format from the front page to put it into the actual citation form. If you need to, this would be a good point to pause the video to make sure that you can get that written down in that way. Lastly, there's an article. Here's how that article is cited. You give obviously credit to the author, put the actual article title name in here, where that comes from, the web magazine, and then obviously the date and the date that you accessed it. Again, if you need to, pause the video to get that written down. This is just familiarizing yourself with how you would go about citing these sources. The last portion is your application. Here's where you got to get to work. I've got some links on here, and I've shared these slides with you on the Google Classroom page. You can click on these links to go to and research what this tsunami was like and learn a little bit more about how this affects the people that live in this part of Eastern Asia. If you click on the link, it'll take you to the web page. That web page then has that factual information for you. Once you on that web page, you can read through and find that factual information. You're then going to write that fact into this portion and then write down that source in the proper format. To here, if I click on the second one, this could be the second source, and I'm looking for a fact from this corresponding video. And the third one here is from CNN. So different credible news sources that have different pieces of information. You're going to look up those actual pieces of information and then write in those facts yourself. Okay, so here's an example of the web page, write the source, and then the last one from the CNN, things that are happening afterwards because it was such a destructive disaster and what's been going on since then. Use that information to complete the application portion, and you're done for the day in geography. Thanks for tuning in. God's blessings.